Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is take two of this video because I recorded the entire thing without any sound. So here we are again. The purpose of this video is because we are all kind of migrating right now to teaching games in a virtual environment, and it is very strange. It's a lot different than teaching games in real life, as some of you have come to realize already. So what I have put together here is just kind of my observations and my tips for teaching games in a virtual environment, specifically Tabletop Simulator. I'm going to reference that a lot. I think a lot of this stuff can kind of be used in any virtual environment for games, but for Tabletop Simulator, some of these apply specifically. So, obviously, body language, looking around the table, reading the room, a lot of this is really important in teaching games in real life. That stuff is not at your disposal in a virtual environment. So, here's a couple of tips. The first thing that I would say, first and foremost, gauge whether your players know Tabletop Simulator very well already. If they don't know Tabletop Simulator well to begin with, choose a game that has very few bits for them to touch and fiddle with. Help them focus on being comfortable inside Tabletop Simulator, because if they're not, it's really going to complicate your teach to have to teach Tabletop Simulator and a game at the same time. Alternatively, if they do already know a specific game very well, if you know, I always play Dominion with this person, teach them Dominion. There you go. Teach them something that they know so they can focus on getting comfortable. This may also be a really good time to kind of tap into some of those keystone games, those games that really kind of teach a single fundamental about something. For example, I always talk about the Manhattan Project, how it's just worker placement. There's nothing else going on in that game. Those things are really good introductions. Similarly, teaching things that introduce people to a specific aspect of Tabletop Simulator. The Mind, for example, is just about holding cards in your hand and playing them on the table and drawing replacements. That's really it. That's all that happens in that game. You draw cards, you put them down on the table, and that's it. The Resistance is a good example. Social deduction games that teach people how to chat with each other in a virtual environment, how to listen, wait your turn, that sort of thing, how to manage not talking over people and making sure that everybody gets heard in a virtual environment. Focus on these games. They're short. They take 5 minutes. You can teach these before you jump into a longer game. Okay, so let's talk about the teach. Start with a designated teacher. This is important in real life, but this is even more important when you are playing in a virtual environment. Talking over somebody or being talked over is obnoxious, and it can be really confusing. So this is even more of a problem, you can imagine, when everyone's voices are being piped directly into everybody's ears. Tell everybody to just kind of keep quiet and do the favor for yourself. Do this favor to anyone who's teaching. Just keep quiet. Let somebody else teach. Let them go. Don't interject. It's going to really kind of throw things off the rails. If somebody does know how to teach, for example, if you are good at teaching and somebody else is doing the teaching, you think you can help, offer to set things up on the table for them or point to things on the table just to kind of help people, kind of be kind of assist the teach more or less. So let's get, speaking of pointing, let's talk about the next thing. This is a technical thing for Tabletop Simulator. You can hit the tab key. Hitting tab will ping the table, and it will alert all the other players and show them an arrow where everyone's pointing. So if they're off to the other side of the table, it will draw them back to where they need to be, and you can use it to illustrate what you're looking at. This is really helpful to guiding people's eyes. Similarly, in Discord, if you stream in Discord, somebody can also watch your stream as well. They could, I have two monitors, for example. They can have the game up on one monitor and your stream up on the other one, and they can kind of see things through your eyes. This is technically a little bit more complicated, so if somebody's not tech savvy or anything, they don't have two monitors, whatever, don't push this, that's fine. This is a little complicated, so don't worry about that. Focus on using that tab to draw their eyes. Okay, so let's talk about the teach itself. You're going to need to really kind of tap back into that very absolute basic fundamentals of teaching from when you first started learning games and teaching games. This applies to teaching games in person, but it's doubly important in a virtual environment. You can't read people's body language again, so try to condense the teach as much as absolutely possible. Strip away everything that people do not need to know about the game and teach it later. That will really, really help people just kind of get into things here. I will say that Tabletop Simulator, one thing I have observed about it is that, you've got people who want to learn all the rules before they even start. Tabletop Simulator really turns almost everybody into a learn by playing type of person. They just need to see it played, and they need to see it played out. It's just the nature of the virtual environment, I found. Okay, so let's talk about kind of the steps of the teach. I've broken this down into kind of like 4 steps. First off, the classic, start with the explanation of who the players are. For example, you are settlers in a new and uncivilized land. Then move into the victory conditions. You win by being the first to get 10 points. Then, in a very, very abridged version of how you achieve those, you gain points by building cities, roads, and playing cards worth victory points. That's it. That's all you need to teach them. This will create the framework and the context for everything else you're about to teach them. Second thing, teach as much of the game as possible using examples of things as they happen. This is kind of a focus thing. When you are playing in real life, you can set up examples on the table and make sure that people are looking at them. In Tabletop Simulator, this gets really messy. Setting things out on the table is just really complicated. There's stuff all over. People aren't sure how to like move things or interact with things without bumping them, flipping them over, or creating a mess, whatever. It just becomes a really, really big mess to set up mock examples. So don't really rely on that. There is just a lot of stuff to look at. And I think that waiting for an example to come up to teach it ensures that people are already focusing on that specific part of the game and that they literally cannot proceed without learning what you have to tell them. If you set up a mock example, somebody may just ignore you, and then you think that they've got it, but they were really not paying attention. That can happen a lot in Tabletop Simulator. This particular one, as an aside, kind of was, when I learned Arkham Horror, the card game, it really kind of set me up for this in a big way. Arkham Horror I learned years ago, and it really changed the way I taught games. In the first scenario of Arkham Horror, you are in a room where the only thing to do is investigate, and that's how you get out of the room. So it's pretty clear to the players that that's what they need to do. It teaches them a few things about the game, too, which make it easier to teach the rest of the game. It teaches them they only have 3 actions. You can investigate, but you can only do it 3 times. It teaches them how a test works, so that they see how that applies to all the other things where a test comes into play. It also moves the game forward in a meaningful way. So these are all helpful things. Think about that when you are teaching examples. The third thing would be narration. Narrate everything that is happening as it is happening. Use that tab key excessively. Make sure you're drawing people's eyes over to whatever you're talking about. Stop as it makes sense and ask, does anybody have any questions about that? Similarly, you should also be very grateful when people ask questions, because in a virtual environment, this is literally your only way to read the room. You cannot pick up on what anyone is thinking or anyone is feeling. You really need to be very grateful when people ask questions, because half of people will not even ask questions. They won't ask. They'll just be quiet and pretend that they know what's going on. Encourage questions. Be grateful when people ask them. Make sure also, as the teacher, that you are focusing on the people playing to make sure that they're playing correctly, and make sure that you're explaining what they're doing to the group as they are actually doing it. When your turn comes around, don't just whip through it. Explain what you're doing. Try and narrate other people's turns if they're not doing it as well. Keep your focus on that. It also doesn't hurt to practice this ahead of time. I have a little bit of practice because I already recorded this video once with no sound, so I've had a little bit of practice. This video is going smoother than the first. It also really helped because I like really making short outlines for things. I'm reading off of an outline right now, and that is one of the reasons why this video is going as well as it is because I'm prepared for it. I'm focused, I'm keeping things in order, I know where to go next. Really helpful. And then the very last thing, this is just a technical part, but in Tabletop Simulator, it's very easy to reload the game. So feel free to play through a dummy turn, and then you can literally just hit 2 buttons, and it will reset the entire state of the game, and everyone can sit back down at the table. It's really nice if people, normally it's kind of a pain to reset up a game, but in Tabletop Simulator, you can just hit a button, and everything's back to the way it was at the beginning of the game. Feel free to play a dummy turn if it's the sort of thing where people want to have all the information at the beginning of the game. So anyway, I hope those are good tips. I hope that you have learned something, and if you have any questions, let me know.